Mark Rogers TV, getting to as many bowl games as we possibly can. And the Russell Athletic Bowl is just a few hours away. And what I would say is one of the more potentially exciting and intriguing matchups between North Carolina and Baylor. We bring in Brittnee Taylor Newman from football.com to help us sort this thing out. Brittnee, thanks so much for joining us. Hope you had a nice Christmas.
I had a great Christmas. Thank you. Excited to be on.
Excellent. So we've got a Baylor team that had high expectations, college football playoff or bust pretty much, and they really got ravaged with injuries throughout the season. So they come in a little bit hobbled into this big-time matchup.
Yeah, this was an offense that even through the end of the season had averaged 48 points per game, a number that probably would have been much higher if they had not gotten bitten by the injury bug as badly as they did. They lost Biletnikoff Award winner Corey Coleman, running back Shock Linwood, obviously their first quarterback, Seth Russell, and then the second quarterback, Jarrett Steidheim, and then at the very end of the season, their third-string quarterback to a concussion in that loss to Texas, when he will be starting this evening. So we're back with the third-string quarterback, Chris Johnson, who's thrown just 42 passes so far in his career for a total of 265 yards. So a very hobbled Baylor offense tonight. I think otherwise we would have all expected this to be a very high-scoring game, but it'll be interesting to see what Baylor is able to do with what they've got left. Obviously, Art Briles is kind of the master of being able to improvise and plug people into situations. He was using a backup wide receiver, I believe it was, as quarterback at the very end of that loss to Texas. So he may have a few tricks up his sleeve, but I think we'll definitely expect to see a little bit of impact on Baylor's ability to score this evening, just based on the number of huge key players that they've lost.
Brittnee, I don't think an opponent or rival could have selected three more impactful players on offense to take off the Baylor Bears offense than Seth Russell, with like 29 touchdown passes halfway through the season. So he was just tearing things up, Heisman Trophy candidate. You mentioned the backup, who was a five-star recruit, who they expect huge things from eventually, and he was doing fine. It was probably a step down. Then you mentioned this debacle against Texas where they had to go to a four-string quarterback, Lynx Hawthorne, who is not a quarterback, so they basically were crippled in the passing game, couldn't throw the ball, and it was just a mess of an offense down the stretch. So this was a team that had an elite offense that basically was just trying to patch something together by the end of the season. Now they've had 4 or 5 weeks to pull things together. And Chris Johnson, we don't know much about him. As you mentioned, his passing numbers, not a whole lot to go on against quality competition. He came in late against Oklahoma State, finished off a victory there, played pretty well. He got hurt against Texas. He played in the TCU game. If anybody saw that one, it was a monsoon. You couldn't gather a whole lot from that. So it'll be interesting to see what Baylor brings on offense. And like you mentioned, Art Briles with some tricks up his sleeve, I'm sure, as a offensive innovator. North Carolina on defense is going to present much more of a challenge than they would have last year. And this is one of the big reasons they're actually in this game and not 6 wins and in the Quick Lane Bowl against Rutgers like they were last year. Gene Chizik has taken over and done quite the job.
Yeah, it's vastly improved. Obviously, there's still room for improvement. They allowed Clemson to score 45 points in the game at the end of the season there in the ACC championship. But vastly improved secondary, vastly improved in the red zone. This is a team that last year was allowing opponents to score almost 40 points per game. They brought that down to just over 22 points per game. So he's definitely tightened up the ship. And then, as you said, they've had a few weeks now to sort of recover from that loss to Clemson. The whole time Art Briles has been back there trying to figure out how he's going to fill in holes. Gene Chizik has been tightening up the ship even more. So I'm kind of excited to see what sort of adjustments they've been able to make post Clemson game in preparation to play Baylor this evening, but vastly improved this year, and that's going to make it even harder for Chris Johnson and what's left of a Baylor offense to be able to mount any kind of an attack for sure.
Yeah, Brittnee, as you mentioned off the top there, it's not a great defense, so let's not go there. So that's well put, that we're not talking about a defense that is a top 5 defense, but in comparison, Gene Chizik has done near miracles with a personnel that's basically the same that they had last year, and they've done just enough that when you have the prolific offense with Elijah Hood at running back, Marquise Williams, dual threat quarterback, and all the skill position players that they have with Ryan Switzer leading the way, that they've allowed the offense to at least breathe and score their 45 points and win the games, and stop people a couple times to make the difference in the ball game in winning 11 games this year. Motivation. This always seems to be a topic with these bowl games. I kind of don't understand it. If I were a head coach and we were in one of those lower tier bowl games or second or third tier bowl games where there might be an incentive issue, I would remind the kids that we're playing in front of more people in this game. Regardless of how many people are in the stands, we're playing in front of more television eyeballs than any time this season. And that's almost always the case because it's exclusive. So you're not competing with 8 or 10 other games. If people want to watch college football, they're watching the Russell Athletic Bowl at 5:30 Eastern time tonight.
Yeah, I think I would probably be using that approach as well, especially if I was Art Briles. You saw such a downward landslide there at the end of the season, Baylor losing 3 of their last 4 games, and obviously really struggling in that loss to Texas, a 23-17 loss. But I think I'd be bringing the same thing to the table. I think I'd be using that to say, let's mount some kind of an underdog status here. And for Baylor, my concern for them, I think, would be that they are so discouraged at this point that might not even work. I mean, this is a team that might have had a shot at playing in the Sugar Bowl just recently if they hadn't sort of fallen apart at the end of the season. And sometimes it can really be hard to recover from that once you start tumbling down that hill. UNC, on the other hand, I think has everything working in their favor when it comes to motivation. I'm sure they've got a little bit of a chip on their shoulder for going the entire season and still being ranked below Florida State by the committee, even though at the time they had only 1 loss. And obviously they're not the second-ranked ACC team, even in the ending rankings here. So I'm sure they've got a little bit of a chip on their shoulder as hard as they work to try to prove themselves that they didn't end up with a higher ranking. And they're going for their first 12-win season in school history. So there's still something really, really exciting to be proven by the Tar Heels, where I think the Baylor Bears are just sort of, kind of scrambling to recover at this point. So I think if you're weighing motivation, I think the Tar Heels have a little bit of an advantage there. They've got more to prove, more to be excited about. And absolutely, I can understand why they would want to take this into the recruiting season with them. I'm sure their coaches are throwing that at them as well. Next year can be even better if you capitalize on this and ride that wave of momentum all the way through.
Definitely, and with both teams on the fringe of the top 10, this a win for either one of them would most likely boost them into the final rankings in that top 10 place. And I don't know that carries the weight that it once did with the college football playoff, but it's still, hey, you're a top 10 football team, and you can carry that on into the next season and beyond. It's in the record books.
Yeah.
I think one other note, Brittnee, to amplify or emphasize the Baylor issues on offense is that Corey Coleman had the single-season touchdown reception record in sight in the Big 12. He had 20 after 8 games. The record's 25. He was well within range, good to go, and they just couldn't get him the ball the last 4 games. Could not throw the kid a touchdown pass because they had no quarterback. So he finishes second or third all-time in the Big 12. So that just kind of gives you an idea of where Baylor stands on offense. So Art Briles and company try to pull it together tonight. I think we do have a good one with North Carolina and Baylor. Brittnee Taylor Newman joins us. Before you leave, anything else in regards to what you've got going on these days?
Headed to Atlanta tomorrow to see the Peach Bowl to cover that. So maybe we can talk about that later this week.
Good stuff. Brittnee, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on.